thanks everyone for joining. I'm so excited to share with you, but also hear from you. I'm really curious to find out how you're traveling and what opportunities there are for you with regards to disaster resilience and recovery in nature. So my background is for the last over 10 years in disaster and emergency management with a strong focus on people. In 2020, after a huge amount of time spent working with people following the bushfires, I took a bit of a step to a role at Zoos Victoria as the Climate Action and Disaster Resilience Advisor, and that really prompted in me a shift in focus towards nature and towards the environment in a disaster context, understanding the needs of nature before, during and after disasters. And that naturally led me to bring the nature and the people bit together, and understanding that actually there's a huge opportunity for people to be supported in their disaster recovery and resilience through nature connection. And I actually was working on a project while I was at Zoos Victoria that was exactly that, nature-led community recovery, supporting community recovery through connecting people to nature and giving people meaningful, impactful and important roles in supporting nature's recovery. So based on the premise, that symbiotic relationship between people and nature, nature will help people recover, and we really need people to help nature recovery, and we'll all do better if we recognise that. So a little bit of the background, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes of the background of this project and how it really evolved, even though connection to nature and healing through nature has been a practice of over 60,000 years in this country and others. I'm just going to give you this more recent background, and then I'm going to pass over to Kate that's going to give you a bit more detail about the toolkit that we've developed and excited to share with you. So 2009, Black Saturday bushfires here in Victoria. And some of the projects in Marysville, which you probably are aware was really heavily impacted. What was then DELP, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, with the Arthur Rylah Institute, the research arm of the Department of Environment, were working in Marysville and working around the significant impact of fish in the local river systems, the galaxis. They are threatened, endemic to the area, and they really suffered as a result of those bushfires through pollution and infiltration into the river systems. So the environmentalists were in there collecting fish and taking the fish away so that they could be looked after whilst the river systems were being cleaned. And the local community were interested in what was going on. What are you doing with our fish? What's going on here? So they showed a natural interest, despite the fact that they were heavily involved in their own impact and recovery at the time. So the environmentalists there spoke to the community and said, well, this is what's happened. These are your fish. They live here, but they've been impacted. We need to take them away while the river system cleans, and then we'll be bringing them back. And so the community then showed a natural interest in what was going on in their backyard with the galaxis fish. And then they sort of saw themselves as custodians and saw the fish as their neighbours in their backyard. And they said, you know, we would like to support and help that. So then there was this very natural process where the local community in Marysville and the people that were working with the fish came together, and the community saw a role for them, understanding the environment, the fish and the needs, that they had this special species. And they became custodians and interested, and it really developed of itself. When the fish were able to be brought back to the local river systems, it was at the same time that people were able to return to their homes as well. And so there was this real synergy between the fish recovering and people's recovery. And it was a natural process that people understood, hey, it's not just us that gets impacted, it's our local environment as well. So following that experience in 2009, there are a lot of advocates for nature-based resilience and recovery. And then jump ahead 10 years and we had the 2019-20 bushfires. And some people, Fern Hames, who was the director at the Arthur Rylah Institute at the time, was advocating very strongly to get funding and support to do more projects around nature-based recovery and connecting people to the natural environment and its recovery. And she and colleagues fought really hard, and we got some funding through Zoos Victoria's support. So there was a partnership between the Arthur Rylah Institute and Zoos Victoria. We got some funding and started implementing projects specifically and proactively around nature-based recovery. The purpose of this project is to not have to fight really hard every single time to get funding and resources to support these projects, which we now have an evidence base that says it works. People will recover when they are connected to nature and have a role in supporting nature's recovery before, during and after disasters. So we developed a toolkit to introduce people to the concept of introducing nature-based projects in their recovery and resilience programs, and of course the preparedness programs by natural extension, to bring them into projects, and so that people can actually have these embedded in programs, and we don't have to fight really hard to get funding and support and interest in these projects, which we know work. So Kate came along and started supporting our project a couple of years ago, and her and I have been working together with our project team and with many other contributors to develop a toolkit. What we wanted to do was make something easily available to people that they can embed and implement into their existing projects. So I'm going to hand over to Kate, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the toolkit, how we developed it, and what it means for you. So thank you. Over to you, Kate.
Yeah. Great. Thanks very much, Amanda. And lovely to be here with you all today. And I think I echo Amanda's comments. Really curious and open to hear from you all how you see this as fitting in your work and what you see as opportunities, challenges, next steps for this kind of work. So as Amanda said, I joined this work a few years ago. So that was through my role at the Arthur Rylah Institute, which is the environmental research institute that's connected in with the State Environment Department here in Victoria. And so I came to that work with a background in research around the health and wellbeing benefits of the natural environment, particularly in spaces where we live, work, learn and play. So I had that grounding and that insight from the research that this is a really important connection. And then in this work, connecting that in the role of disaster recovery and resilience. So in the work that I've been doing at the Arthur Rylah Institute and DECA, I was coordinating work happening with our Victorians Valuing Nature program. And so that was connected in with our biodiversity, our state biodiversity plan. And that is a really, I think, important plan, which is recognising the role for people in caring and being custodians of the natural environment. So as Amanda said, that's not a new idea, but important that we recognise that in the policy space. So this work came about post-catastrophic flooding here in Victoria. So we had flooding in 2022-23 and again in 23-24. And so this came about as part of that funding post-disaster. So again, that's not a new story coming in the recovery process. So what we wanted to recognise with this project was what are the current needs of the community and the people that are working in this space? How can we address those? But also, how can we draw on the stories and the insights of the work that's happened before that, Amanda has just overviewed there? And how can we set ourselves up for being in a better place into the future? So what are the needs in the future? So with this work, we wanted to acknowledge and recognise all of the work that had been happening across the community, start to collect some of those stories of the work that had been happening, and as Amanda said, draw together some useful tools, examples that people can use in shaping this work. So it might be recognising when you're already doing this, it might be providing those opportunities for conversations within your own organisation, which happened as part of this process, recognising the opportunities that exist across emergency management, biodiversity and community engagement. And also recognising where there might be opportunities or existing instances of that in your own recovery plans. As part of this work, we really recognised the power of storytelling. So when we were starting to connect with people who were working in this space and trying to communicate our ideas of nature-led community resilience, just telling that story of the Galaxids was a really powerful way of sharing this concept, but also providing a way in for people to see where that was happening in their own work. So that really became clear as part of this project. And so that's why we have a story library that sits along the toolkit to highlight, where that's been happening in the community and what it might look like to adapt and contextualize some of the tools that we've developed as part of this. And I guess one of the other things that we really wanted to do is provide some text and some content for any of the work that you might be doing, for things like, funding applications, for any communications that you might be writing, for any ways that you want to talk about how this aligns with local, national and international guidelines and frameworks. So that's really what we've tried to do with this toolkit. Read through it, take what's useful to you, leave what's not useful, adapt it. You'll be able to do things and think of things that we haven't thought about with this toolkit. And again, we'd really love to hear from you as you're testing it, trying it out. You know, what's working, what's not working, what you'd like to see in the future. So we see this as an iteration one, and we want to keep, you know, building this into the future, and seeing cases where people are using it in communities. So with that, I will then hand on to Nina.
Thanks, Kate. Just making sure. Matt, did you want to go first, or are you happy for me to take the reins?
It's completely up to you. You can lead if you want, and then I'll finish with a little story. It's good.
Yeah, awesome. No worries. Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Nina O'Brien from Foundation for Rural and Regional Renewal. Look, as a national philanthropic organisation, nature-based resilience is really a centrally embedded in what we love to support regional, rural and communities to activate in the recovery and resilience building space. Last year alone, we delivered around $24 million worth of grants, around 47% of which were disaster recovery or resilience based. So that gives you a quick snapshot of how much regional Australia has been impacted by disasters, but also, you know, the focus we take on supporting them to do that. What we see is a huge diversity and array of projects, and so it was fantastic to collaborate with Amanda and Kate and Matt to highlight some of the fantastic work that happens at a local level. We love providing a voice and a platform for small regional communities to for the theory to inform the practice and the practice to inform the theory. So I thought we'd just quickly skate through a few of those at a high level today, and Matt's actually going to take you below the surface of what that actually looks like on a hyper-local level. And I'll actually give you some quick tips in terms of how to actually get this work resourced at the end as well. Matt will talk to you, and in chatting today, thank you. We've just posted the toolkit in the chat there. FRRR collaborated with Amanda, Kate and Matt in terms of the story library itself, and we can, Kate, while I'm talking, just pop that in the chat. Good on you, you're a legend. If you want to dive into the detail, that's really a great place to start in terms of what this actually looks and feels like at a practical level in communities. Berry Barmera Land Care is, Matt will chat to you about that in a moment. But we support a really diverse range of things. So things like post-22 floods in the Wodonga region have supported a nature-based playground in a public space to support you know, a reconnection with nature, but also to increase the personal well-being for children and families in that particular context in the Murray River region. But we also support things that are purely environmentally focused. So places like Brunswick Heads in the flood recovery process, we've supported riparian restoration programs. So literally helping communities to get back out, get back in their communities, both connect with each other, but also support the physical environmental recovery of their floodways and waterways post-flood. Scooting down to Victoria, Bairnsdale, and this is a co-funded project with lots of funding partners, the Sounds of Recovery acoustic monitoring. So when we say engaging in nature, that takes a huge amount of different types of forms, and we particularly love seeing creative responses to engaging with nature. And I think this is a great example of that, and I can pop a video in the chat if that's of help. In simple terms, it was a citizen science project that monitored the recovery of threatened wildlife through audio recordings that was then taken and published as creative content. So a really multi-party great project and really interesting way to, again, getting people connected back with nature, people supporting nature, nature supporting people in that recovery process. At FRRR and in the sort of broader work that we do, we take a really broad brush lens to disaster, and so we certainly from a community perspective, they don't see the distinction between formalised disasters and declared disasters and climatic impacts more broadly. So we play a really active role in supporting communities across regional Australia in drought preparedness and resilience building. And so we've been doing this for about 4.5 years now, and starting to see some really interesting responses to that. It's things like, without being biased to SA, Matt, down on the Limestone Coast, just around the corner from you guys, the Limestone Coast Landscape Board are working with local Aboriginal communities to develop a series of workshops called Walking the Seasons. So it's engaging with different facets of the community. Some it's tiny kids, some of it's a lot older people, to actually understand nature and recovery from drought and dryness from a First Nations lens, which is really unique and really interesting, and certainly different to how we normally frame drought from a sort of fairly colonial construct. So those workshops are literally taking place at the moment. I think there was one last Friday and there's one coming up in early March, so early April as well. We also support a lot of on-country work. So minimal land management up in the NT, just sort of roughly Crabclaw Island, halfway between Wadeye and Darwin. So that part of the world support on-country activities for First Nations women and First Nations rangers, who play a really active and important role in disaster recovery and resilience building. We support on-country activities like dance and song and weaving and painting. That particular event, 300 Aboriginal women came together to do that. So that just gives you a super quick skate across the surface of the types of diverse ways you can interpret nature-based resilience. In terms of, so there's some practical examples. The next thing we turn our minds to is how we're going to resource these particular efforts. A lot of these efforts can be done, I think, in a fairly cheap and cheerful way. And I think it's always good to sort of start your thinking there and to ground your thinking in what the idea is before you start the money. Start thinking about, where we might find some resources. What I can pop in the chat, and just a note, on the FRRR website, depending on where you are in Australia and what the scope of your project is, we have a tool on our website we refer to internally as a sorting hat. Because we have lots of different types of funding that comes on and offline throughout the year, depending on where you are geographically and what the focus areas are. I'll pop that in the chat once I've finished chatting, and you literally can work your way through that, and that will help you really quickly get to the, oh, right, these are the funding applications, avenues that are open to me at the moment. But I'll just do a quick shout out to two. Strengthening rural communities, prepare and recover, can support resilience building projects up to $25,000. The next close is the 24th of June. That is what we sort of refer to internally as our front door of supporting communities in disaster recovery and resilience building work. And throughout the year, we have programs that come on and offline by virtue of sort of our corporate partnerships that we have. One of those corporate partnerships is with Suncorp. There's a particular program called Rebuilding Futures that has national eligibility at the moment, strongly disaster preparedness focused. Again, up to $25,000, but they do close on the 3rd of April. So they do come around once or twice a year. If I can pop these links in the chat, I'll also give you some links to some other funders that are working in this space as well. Big shout out to NAB and RACQ who are working in this space. And a quick note to say, if ever in doubt, just give us a call. We love chatting to people and don't mind a yarn. So if you're ever unsure, just drop us an email or phone us up. Happy to pop my contact details in the chat if helpful as well. Matt, across to you. I'll stop talking.
Thanks, Nina. So just on the back of what Nina said, Berry Barmer Landcare, which is who I'm representing today, was the receiving participant of the Strengthening Rural Communities grant. So live action, this is what happens. I'll go back a couple of steps. So as you know, my name is Matt. I wear several hats, but for today, I'll try and stop leaning on my desk because it's wobbling, and I don't know about you, but I'll get car sick. So I currently have the privilege of chairing a hyper-local, as we'll call it, land care group. So we cover maybe 20,000 people across one or two major towns and a couple of smaller ones in the Riverland of SA. And if I'm really clever, I will be able to share this and you'll be able to see what I'm seeing, I'm hoping. You should see a map with a blue stream going through it. Am I winning? I haven't played with this for a while. So on that, you can see Berry and Barmera, obviously the two names in our name, and the Loxton area is actually not our area. So if you just look at that top strip across the top, you've got some townships, you've got irrigated horticulture, you've got some native vegetation, and the big blue line is not normally that big. We had a bit of a flood in 2022, the eastern states sent it down to us. So you can see all of the floodplain that it's kind of filled up. That's the major recreation area for a lot of the communities here. So as part of our project, we wanted to really engage with people to help them understand, particularly the ecological and environmental impacts of a flooding event. So, and it was really important to get our timing right, because prior to the flood peak hitting, no one would listen. So this is just common sense in it. If you think your house is going to flood, I'm sorry, but I can't care about the possums until I know my lounge room is safe. So once that peak had hit and the water started to slowly recede, people could actually go, wow, this is amazing. This is a one in a generational event. What's happening? What's happening to the trees? What's happening to the animals, to the fish? And that's where we came in. So we ran a series of engagement exercises, and a lot of them, I'll flick to this picture. So these kind of events. So from my point of view, super simplistic, but super powerful. So putting people in a landscape and interpreting what they're seeing. So I was just thinking about it as we were talking before. The fact that we're on a Zoom around the country says a lot how we've come along from a technological advance. And I think some of the expense of that is engagement with nature. So on that image, you can see there just above their heads, you'll see a bit of a brown smear on the gum tree, 3/4 the way up. That was the water line. So these people would have had 2 foot of water above their heads. So to be able to go back and stand on that bridge and go, oh, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at fish, and we're looking at movement, and we're looking at birds. And I use the word a fair bit around wonder. I'm sorry, you're going to have to look at me again. Because that's what it is. Like, I've done a lot of work with school kids, and as soon as you can kind of peel back the curtains and go, wow, this is where the yabbies go, or this is what the fish do, people become invested. And the really important thing about that is, if you're invested in the environment and you're looking at the wonder or the sounds or the smells, you're taken away from your daily troubles for a while. And that's what we try and do a lot. So it can be incredibly powerful to get, and often the groups of people that we get, they don't know each other. They're really diverse, everything from professionals to 90-year-olds to 9-month-old. We've done some bat workshops. We've done a whole series of workshops over the years. And the diversity of people is astounding. The excitement that they see is the same. So their connection is increased. And I can sprout on about this for hours, and I'll try not to, but what we've found is it's really important to start building that community and connection before anything happens. So flooding is quite a good disaster. If you're going to have a disaster, riverine flooding, I'll say riverine, not the rest of the country, it's normally quite limited. You can get a lot of wonder out of it. A lot of the community is not impacted. They can be, interrupting their drive and things, as opposed to total devastation of things like fire. So knowing the disaster that you're working with or potentially will be working with, and knowing how that impacts on your target group. So for us, our target group is broad community, everyone, because everyone's in the same boat. We've started to head towards working, so from the back of these projects and a whole bunch of others, around at-risk people. So whether that's socially isolated, the aged, we do a lot of work now with Indigenous First Nations in our local area. So they're the groups that we need to lift a little bit more. They're the ones that it's a bit, if you're in a wheelchair, it's really hard to engage in nature. So we try and work on those and try and say, look, how can we create opportunities? How can we, we've been talking recently about a Ricali project with water rats. I did my honours on water rats. I love them, but they're nocturnal and they live in the water and they've got rat in their name. So like there's the trifecta of really hard to engage people. We can use remote cameras to monitor them and then get people who can't get into the environment to review those photos. So suddenly you've got a tangible job that puts you in the environment and puts you out there. So it's about finding those opportunities. But I mean, the flooding project was great. It was a relatively small project. It was $10,000. We ran a series of workshops. It enabled us to reach out to people that we wouldn't normally reach. Like we get the low fruit pretty easily. The people that want to be there will come regardless of what we do. We often, if we do a bat night, we'll have to knock people back. But these were different. These were people that might have been really vocal prior to the peak of the flood about what might happen. And you can actually go, well, it's not all bad. You know, there was some devastation, don't get me wrong, like there is always, but if you can show people that there's a positive to some of these things as well, then to be brutal, we've got them on the hook. We can start to then incorporate other messaging in that. So from a land care point of view, nature is our vessel for our discussions. So we work with a lot of mental health groups and people with issues. We use a nursery. They come in, they grow plants for farmers. So nature is the theme, I suppose, that we use that threads through all of our work. How we engage, who we engage with is the project by project. There's about a whole other page of stuff I wanted to talk about, but we can talk about it in the breakouts because I'm pretty sure I've done my 5 minutes pretty quickly. Yeah, and I suppose part of this, with my hat on today, I'm land care, but I have worked for NEMA, I have worked for state government for over a decade, so I also first respond on a whole bunch of stuff. So I get to see it from lots of different angles and bring that knowledge back to our community and try and help as much as we can.